to this policy forum on sharpening our competitive edge through investment in advanced technology tools for learning. I am Michael Calabrese, Vice President of the New America Foundation, which has organized this event, and I direct our Wireless Future program at New America. We have been working on many different fronts to try to promote advanced technologies, that will be great for advancing U.S. education, skills, and learning in this increasingly competitive global environment. And this event today is really just a kind of a glance at some of the incredible things that can be done if we increase R&D in these technologies through vehicles like the Digital Opportunity Investment Trust that you'll hear about today. I think this is well timed, not only because it is Innovation Week here in the House, but also because of the report that came out just in February by the National Academy of Sciences, Rising Above the Gathering Storm. And that report, which gathered headlines for concluding what business leaders have been warning for years, and that is that our nation's outdated education and workforce development systems are inadequately preparing America's citizens for the jobs and global competition of the 21st century. And just to, I'm going to read one quote from that report, Rising Above the Gathering Storm. It said, quote, "The critical lack of technically trained people in the United States can be traced directly to poor K-12 mathematics and science instruction. Few factors are more important than this if the United States is to compete successfully in the 21st century." And we held an event last week, which was, on one level, it was about technologies to help parents control the media consumption of children. And of course, there was a lot of complaining about the bad things that are on both television and on these gaming platforms. But there was also quite a bit of remarks about the good, because the reality is, as the Kaiser Family Foundation survey showed, that children's aged 8 to 18 are spending an average of 6 hours a day on electronic media, and increasingly shifting their attention from television to the internet and to gaming platforms, Xboxes, PlayStations, online, interactive. That's the way they're becoming accustomed to interact with information. And so the sort of 19th century school system is not reaching them where they live today, and it's also not giving them things that they can always take home and plug in to the places they plug in. So to commemorate House Innovation Week, this forum focuses on one of the most promising ways to attack this developing crisis, and that is more federal investment in advanced learning technologies that can harness the power of virtual reality games, high-tech gaming platforms, which are increasingly prevalent in homes at all income levels, intelligent computer tutors, and other cutting-edge technologies for teaching, learning, and workforce training. We'll hear from the defense sector, because the Defense Department has actually been a long-time successful user of these interactive games, both for general education and for specific battlefield training simulations. We'll also hear from industry, from both the designers of games themselves, as well as from in Microsoft, which now has the hottest selling platform for these sort of games. And we will see demonstrations. I think it'll be particularly interesting to see demos of 3 advanced learning games developed under the leadership of the Federation of American Scientists: Immune Attack, Discover Babylon, and Mass Casualty Incident Responder. Those demos, in turn, will highlight the potential impact that the Digital Opportunity Investment Trust legislation which is H.R. 2512 on the House side and S. 1023 on the Senate side, and we hope to be joined by some of the sponsors of those bills. But we'll hear from Larry Grossman and others how Do It is a proposal for increased federal leadership and investment in R&D for these advanced learning technologies, as well as for a range of other things, such as the digital future of educational public broadcasting. So hopefully that will shed some light on what really is an urgent need in this country right now. So we're going to open with Larry Grossman, who is co-chair of Digital Promise and the former president of NBC News and of PBS. Larry's the co-author, as I said, of Digital Promise with Newton Minow, the former chairman of the FCC. It was a book where they first laid out this vision of a trust that could invest in America's future. Larry?
I'm one to be careful about tripping over the wires and putting the whole thing out of whack. So with my big feet, I'm going to tread very softly. I want to first thank Michael Calabrese, welcome you all to this event, and the New America Foundation, also Michael's colleague Jim Snyder, who brought his own rooting family team, son and daughter, with him. They're the ones that really are going to have to make the judgment as to whether this stuff works effectively or not. But New America Foundation has been great to host and support this event. As most of you know, and as Michael suggested, we seem to have achieved a national and even a bipartisan consensus about the need to transform our education, lifelong learning, and skills training systems to keep America competitive in the 21st century. The National Academies with their Gathering Storm report, the Council on Competitiveness with its Innovate America report are the latest to weigh in following the Digital Promise Project and many congressional commissions and analyses that articulated the urgent need for new learning and training tools to meet the global competition in the digital age. The good news is that the same revolutionary information technologies can be deployed to transform learning and skills training that have already significantly transformed our military, our communications, our financial systems, our economy, and even our entertainment and our environment. We must not let our essential public service institutions, our schools, universities, libraries, museums, and our workforce itself fall behind in this new digital environment. And this is where the federal government comes in. Congress must show leadership in making these new tools available nationwide. We need a significant investment now, as Michael suggested, in R&D for education, just as Congress so boldly did in the past to promote learning and education with the Northwest Ordinance, the Land-Grant Colleges Act, and the GI Bill. Once in each century, Congress made a substantial and far-sighted investment that transformed education and the nation's economy. Each was enacted during a time of great national stress. Each ensured that our people would have the education and training leadership that they'd need to meet the challenge of the time, and each dramatically enhanced the nation's economic strength. These historic laws provide enduring precedents for the Digital Opportunity Investment Trust, the Do It legislation, now before both houses of Congress on a bipartisan basis. The Digital Promise legislation has been 6 years in development. More than 100 scientists, engineers, corporate executives, learning and education specialists brought together under the leadership of the Learning Federation, under the auspices of the Federation of American Scientists, developed a learning R&D roadmap at the request of Congress. And that's what spawned the Digital Promise legislation. And Kay Howell, Project Director of the Learning Federation, and Henry Kelly, the President of the Federation of American Scientists, are both here this morning. The Do It legislation would establish a national R&D trust fund an investment that would do for learning and training at all levels what NSF does for science, what NIH does for health, and what DARPA does for the military. Industry has clearly stated that although private corporations are eager to partner in this effort, they cannot provide the adequate funding for the major research and coordination that is needed for the new digital information age. The idea of a Do-It R&D Trust Fund for Learning and Training has achieved endorsement from every major national education, library, museum organization, as well as from leading researchers, scientists, policymakers, and high-tech corporate leaders. To cite just a few, Eamon Kelly, the former chair of the National Science Board, Internet pioneer Vint Cerf, who this year was awarded the Presidential Medal of Freedom for his work, and former Republican Senator Warren Rudman, co-chair of the influential U.S. Commission on National Security in the 21st Century. All of them have endorsed the absolute need for the Do-It legislation. Many of you who are in this room will be making the key decisions about how best to ensure America's competitiveness through federal legislation. We urge you to recognize that no plan for American innovation and economic competitiveness will be complete without a significant investment in research and development to adapt the remarkable advanced information technologies for teaching, learning, and training. My Digital Promise Project co-chair, Newt Minow, and I, along with our dedicated project director, Ann Murphy, from whom you'll hear later on, and a talented deputy, Rainey Guilford, look forward to working with you to make this happen. Thank you.
Thanks, Larry. And I think we all really owe a debt of gratitude to Larry and to Newt Minow and Ann Murphy for really just continuing persistently to push this Do-It idea, really on a volunteer basis. It's really a model of citizenship that we need to keep in the future. Next up is Henry Kelly, who is president of the Federation of American Scientists, a position he's held since July of 2001. Prior to that, Dr. Kelly served for 7 years in the White House as Assistant Director for Technology and was one of the President Clinton's science advisors. In that role, Dr. Kelly convened the President's Information Technology Advisory Committee and translated their advice into a large expansion and refocusing of federal information technology research. So he's really interacted with every industry and every level of government on these issues, and will have the exciting demonstrations for us today. Henry?
Thanks, Michael. See here. Get going. I'm up here speaking for myself and Kay Howell, who's already been introduced. But Kay, would you identify yourself? She is the guiding genius behind all of this, and we have to. Only one of us could be up here. But if you have really, I should say, interesting questions, make sure you give them to Kay. So, well, what's driving all of this, of course, is the idea that you can actually use technology to make learning more efficient and more fun. And the question posed here is, suppose you could actually increase learning by in a fixed amount of time by the equivalent of 1-letter grade, or cut the cost by 30% for learning a given amount. It would be worth a lot. And the question is this possible? Well, the fact is that it absolutely is possible. There is a lot of advance in in learning science and the theory of how people learn that demonstrates very clearly how you can improve the outcomes of people coming into the educational system from many different backgrounds. The catch is that most of these ideas are just unaffordable. They require a lot more manpower, a lot more equipment. Now, the assertion we're going to try to prove here today is that there's at least a good opportunity to use technology to solve this problem. In other words, the things that seem to be unaffordable suddenly become affordable. Now, there's been a lot of talk here about America's competitiveness position. And the thing that comes out of the Gathering Storm report and all of the other studies of innovation is, in fact, the economy being transformed in a really remarkable way. That competitiveness really does depend on staying ahead of technology, changing rapidly, continuously learning organizations. So if you go into the trying to understand what it is employers are looking for, that has actually qualitatively changed. Obviously, they want more technical skills, communication skills, but they also want people who can participate in a continuously learning organization. And that's a set of very diverse skills, which apply not just to the top management, but to everybody from the guy that's driving the UPS delivery truck trying to figure out the new GPS system to the people in sales and marketing. So the Department of Commerce and others have tried to look at what people are trying to explore. The kinds of things up here are what they're looking for. One of the troubles, of course, is it's very hard to teach people this kind of thing or to measure it given existing systems. Another things that they're looking for, and this certainly applies in the military, but it applies in corporations and increasingly even in all service organizations, is being a member of an effective team. How do you know that somebody is an effective team member? How do you train them? How do you measure it? What are the characteristics of a good team member? Well, particularly the Defense Department has invested very heavily in this over the years and are beginning to understand what it is that it takes to develop a good team and how you know if you had one. Again, the problem is how do you actually provide this kind of skill to people in the workforce, going through the training system, and how do you measure it? Well, the answer here, so the essential problem then we're tackling is that you've got this huge increase in what it is that you need to know. It means what everybody needs to know. And you have, of course, people coming into the America's education training environment that come from many, many different backgrounds. There's a huge diversity of people that you need to train. And the question is, can you address this problem of more complex training to a more complex student body without a huge amount of additional money? Well, again, the only thing that seems to make sense in solving this conundrum is trying to find a way to use technology in a more creative way. And one question that you always get in saying, well, isn't this computer technology just like everything else we've heard? You know, Thomas Edison said that he would make a movie of the best physics professor in the country and we could fire all the other physics professors. Same thing was said for radio, same thing was said for television. Well, in fact, all the new technologies did help education, but I'll assert here that this technology is qualitatively different, and qualitatively different in three different ways. One is that it is personal. It knows who you are. It has an ability to collect information about what you as an individual are doing and what you want and what you know. And it can keep track of what you're doing and in a way that makes sense to you. If you're trying, for example, to learn how to fly an airplane, you know fully well when you're ready to move on to another level. You don't mind being measured if this is being done correctly. The second thing is that it's active. Unlike any other media where you're passively taking in information, these tools insist on continuous feedback from the person interacting with them. You can't just sit there with your mind turned off. The system won't tolerate that. And finally, it's available anywhere, anytime. You can get to it through an increasly wired and networked world through a whole variety of devices and inventions that are coming out for reasons having nothing whatsoever to do with education. Now, we know that these kinds of tools, these active, highly interactive tools, are effective because we've seen how they are working in the service sectors that we all participate in. You've seen gigantic productivity gains in services from banking to finance, where things are being tailored to your exact needs. You're finding, of course, the entertainment industry is being transformed with everything, of course, from the computer games we've been hearing about to animations, videos, and other tools. The ability to get information to you when you want it in a form that makes sense to you is also out there. Whether you're using a help system trying to figure out how to install your new computer home sound system, or you're a copier employee trying to figure out how to repair the latest copier. There are lots of very sophisticated tools out there for managing inquiry and tailoring it to who you are. And there are also things called user modeling, which is used throughout industry to figure out how to make your web experience more attractive to you. And one of the things that's of course intriguing is your computer is filling up with cookies, and the cookies on your computer probably know more about your kid than your teacher may. They know a lot about you, and they do try to make sure that they're giving you the news, the products, the other information you need. Now, all of these things have demonstrated that there are tools and capabilities out there that, at least in principle, can be employed to solve the kinds of problems we've been talking about. Another reason that we think that the tools we're talking about are real is if you look at the experience of people who have tried to convert from, to compare classroom instruction to an individual tutor instruction. So if you see the big purple blob there, if you can think that that's an ordinary classroom, 30 people in a classroom with a teacher who's trying to make sure that everybody knows sort of enough before they move on. The yellow curve there is measured data from a guy named Bloom who compared the classroom with 30 kids with 30 tutors. So they all got individual instruction. Of course, the tutor didn't move on until the kid was ready. If they didn't understand it one way, you'd explain it another way. And you can see you have a two standard deviation improvement, a huge increase. Now the white blob in the middle is kind of where we are today with information technology based training, that you can actually get part of the way towards a human tutor. And our assertion here is with enough creativity and research and making the best use of real human instructors and the technology, you should be able to do better than the individual tutor could do by themselves. The data on the measured outcome of the performance of these tools is very spotty, but it is impressive. Even the sort of modestly successful products that are out there today have a significant impact. And I won't dwell on this at length because Dexter Fletcher, who is the origin of a lot of this information from the Institute for Defense Analysis, will talk about it later. But there is growing evidence that this actually does work. Now, this leads to the obvious question, well, if you're so smart, why aren't you rich question? And that is that if this is such a great idea, why aren't businesses rushing in with new products and ideas the way the market is supposed to work? Well, this is a really difficult market. Selling into the education market is one of the most complex and tricky environments. You can imagine the institutions themselves don't think of themselves as learning service organization, and so it is a very tough market to penetrate. The kinds of research that you need will yield results that will spread like lightning around the community, and it's very hard for an individual investor to take a proprietary interest in those ideas in a way that would return their research investment. And the federal investment in this area has been very spotty, and that's of course one of the things we'd like to change. So you'll hear it from two commercial developers here, and you should ask them why it is that they aren't trying to invest as much money into educational games as they're investing in commercial games, and you'll find that this really does go at the core of their answer. But it is a classic market failure. It's a kind of problem that has driven federal investment in R&D for generations. And there are many cases where the federal investment was able to absorb the risk, define the big ideas, and then people were able to grab those ideas and go off and build huge successful commercial enterprise. And that ranges from from funding aircraft research to hybrid seed research to pharmaceuticals. This is a long tradition of not competing with private research, but when there actually is a reason that the private investors can't take the risk, the feds, in fact, can step in and take the risk. Now, I'm going to be talking here specifically about trying to use a lot of the ideas built into computer games or video games. Now, these commercial products, in fact, embody a lot of the ideas I've been talking about, not because they were designed to provide effective education particularly, though some have been, but because a lot of the things that we need to develop are, in fact, inherent in these games. The thing that, of course, is important about games is how astoundingly popular they are. These are now The sales of games now exceed the box office sales of movies. There are, half of Americans play. Astoundingly, almost as many women now play games as men. And of course, kids are spending hundreds and hundreds of hours learning artificial things to solve artificial problems in these environments. So we, having decided that we were going to actually try to plunge into this environment and build some games that actually function for real learners in real subject matter. We had defined a research agenda, but there's nothing like finding out what you don't know until you actually try to do it. We were able to put together 3 projects here, which I'll talk to you about briefly, all funded by the federal government. One is Immune Attack, that's designed to teach you about the immune system, aimed at high school seniors and college freshmen. Discover Babylon, which is trying to teach language and culture to 8 to 14-year-olds. And Mass Casualty Incident Responder, which is looking at an adult population, particularly fire chiefs. Now, you can see there are 3 different federal agencies here. A lot of them were the programs that we got this funded through programs which had a very, very broad purpose, such as using information technology to solve interesting social problems. We were fortunate enough to get creative people in each of these agencies to take a risk and fund these projects. But there really isn't an ongoing project in any of these agencies focused coherently around this set of activities. So we had the fortune that we're developing 3 very diverse subject matter and for 3 very diverse groups of people these games, and we try to come up with a consistent approach. And our approach is fundamentally rooted in learning science. We spent a lot of time talking to learning scientists. They're built around the gaming idea that you move forward when you are satisfied that you're ready to move forward. A typical game, you defeat one kind of bad guy, and when you're feeling just comfortable enough, they move you forward, not too fast or not too slow. You want to encourage questions, because one of the things that learning scientists keep on saying is that when somebody's asking a deep question about a problem they want to solve, that is a sweet spot. So you want to encourage questions and get an answer quickly and provide immediate feedback. And of course, you want to get a problem. The genius of a good game is that you want to play it. You want to win this game. There's something there's nobody telling you to do it. And if there's a goal that makes sense to you, you're willing to put hundreds of hours into figuring out how to address that game. Now, that's as much an art as it is a science, and it's something which is, the magic of that requires going to people who have tried to think in this way. But if you do solve it, you get the other thing that the learning scientists say is essential, which is time on task. If the kid is willing to spend 100 hours learning this particular math skill in order to accomplish something that they deeply care about, then you've won the game. And of course, what you need, the other piece of this is continuous evaluation, and that means both continuous evaluation of the kids who are, or the people who are actually engaged in this, so that you can adjust the system to meet what they're trying to achieve. But we're also evaluating our games through independent third parties who are coming in and trying to make sure that we get an independent critique of what it is that these games are doing, whether they're effective or not. And so what I'll do here is quickly go through these three different games and tell you a bit about them. One of the frustrating things, of course, is that talking about a game is kind of frustrating. You need to play the game, and I hope we'll have an opportunity here to let you at least play around with some of these things. So what I'm going to be showing you is a series of video clips. But let me start off with the first game. Is called Immunology. It's trying to teach you about a subject which everybody ought to be interested in. This is the world's greatest battle. You're continually repelling bacteria and viruses in your environment with a system that is this distributed force of white blood cells that have a whole series of very, very tricky skills. Now, if you can make this battle boring, you're really working at it. But of course, there are biology texts that have managed to do that. So we're trying to find a way to get you back to the original excitement of this problem. This was, again, sponsored by the National Science Foundation, and our major partners were Brown University and University of Southern California. And if you will pardon me, turned out to be, so if I do, okay, Control Enter, okay.
I'm building a tiny remote-controlled robot, small enough for me to inject into my arm. It's designed for one thing, to teach those lazy immune cells of mine to get up off their butts and do their jobs. See, to train my immune system, I have to infect myself with something to be funny. If I can't train fast enough, whatever I'm infected with will kill me. The bad guy? Pseudomonas aeruginosa. It's a common waterborne bacteria that causes swimmer's fever. And so
Okay, so this is the conceit. There's a patient who wants to get her immune system in gear. You win the game by training the different parts of your immune system to work, and starting off with a macrophage, which is a type of white blood cell. You start off with the simplest possible challenge here in the immune system, which is to get this macrophage to find that Pseudomonas and eat it. Of course, there's some problems you got to solve right away. One is, how do you get there? How does it even know where the infection is? Well, you get there by seeing these little signals on the side of the blood vessels near the site of the infection. Then you need to figure out how to get out of the blood vessel and track it. Now, to get to the point where you know how to do this, you fly around through the blood vessel. You gather information. Anything you see here is, again, you're seeing this as a video, but you're flying around. You can click on anything, figure out what it is. You can put on a special scanner so that you can see the the chemicals on the surfaces of these different cells that are clues that you need, because there's a special kind of chemical on the vessels near where an infection is. So you need to figure out what that looks like. You're given clues here for the mission objective throughout this. When you're here, you've now trained it to exit the blood vessel. So you're now out in the tissue, which is another strange world. You don't know what in the heck all of this stuff is. One of the essential ideas of immunology is you have to train your forces to attack the good guys and not the bad guys. But when you go out into this weird world, you have no clue of who the good guys or bad guys are. Of course, we gave you a big hint by showing you a picture of the bad guy at the beginning in this case. But you also discover that the bad guys are issuing this particular kind of signal, because there's a trail of chemicals. So basically, you have to train your cell to follow its nose to get to the bad guys. But you need to follow the right trail. If you follow the wrong trail, you get confused. The training goes through these little mini games that you've been seeing, because in order to, if you figured out what your cell needs to do, in order to teach it to do it, you play one of these little games. Now, you can't win the game, any of these mini games, without one being pretty damn good with your fingers. And I must say that I always get clobbered by 14-year-olds in trying to do this. But no matter how good you are with your fingers, you can't win it without having gotten the information, so you know what thing to grab onto or what signal to follow. And if you've been able to do this correctly, you go through the 3 or 4 challenges, play the 3 or 4 mini games to attack these cells. You'll find that, again, you can see here when the scanner is turned on, you can see the microscopic signals coming out, and when you turn it off, they go away. If you succeed in this, you have in fact trained your macrophage so that it can automatically, without your intervention, escape from the blood vessel, follow the trail, and eat the bad guys. Now, of course, and that's what you see going on here. And so you're feeling pretty good about yourself at this point, but then you go to level 2, where the bad guys get a little bit smarter. They start hiding, or they start multiplying so fast that macrophages can't take care of it. Now, at each step here, you are able to ask questions. When you're confused, you can go into this little tool, which is like a PDA. You can type in a question. The answer may be a picture. The answer may be a video. The answer may be text. Often people don't know what question to ask, so the learning people told us, give the kids some suggested questions, and that seems to work really well. You start, have you thought about asking this question? Well, that will sort of lead them into a deeper inquiry. So the other thing is that the advice you get here is, can you get the DB up here or not? And at each point it knows what information you've gathered and what you haven't. So it knows what you know and what you don't know. So that there's a help system built into this. It gives you suggestions or hints. But as you get through different levels of this, can you get it? Okay, good. Yeah. No. Oop. Let me pause this. Hold on. What's this? Can you get the talk back up? Yeah. So with each, the game here though is that at each level, you go into the bad guys take on a new set of skills which you need to defeat. And some, their ways of hiding become more clever, and therefore your ingenuity in attacking them needs to increase. Now, the next one I'm going to show you is Discover Babylon. This is funded by IMLS. And this one is focusing on 8 to 14-year-olds. We're doing this in collaboration with the Walters Art Museum in Baltimore, which is an inner-city museum that was very interested in trying to find ways of getting people who lived near this museum interested in their exhibitions. And one of the toughest things to get interested in is Mesopotamia, because a lot of the stuff look like pieces of, well, they are pieces of clay with little marks on them or little beads, and you say, eh. So it's very tough to get people interested in stuff. So the fact is, though, this is ancient Iraq. This is one of the most spectacular places on the planet. This place actually invented writing. It's the first place that the recorded use of the wheel occurred. These guys had the first written laws, the first signed poem. And so trying to understand what this culture did and the role that writing played in creating it was key to this. So we're able here to go back through the history of writing that started off with pictograms to things that turned into instead of a picture of a fish, you have a sketch of artificial sketch of a fish, and finally the word ish is represented by a symbol. So you go to phonetics, and so we're trying to use the objects that are actually in this museum to build an interesting game that'll not only get you interested in the subject matter, but also might tempt you to go back into the museum and look around. It also turns out that bringing the people together to build this, the archaeologists and historians that work together on this actually learned a lot by seeing their own stuff reassembled, because most of this material is spread out across the planet, literally, and so we were able to bring it virtually together so that you can get artifacts that are in the museum and artifacts that might be in Berlin, all in the same game. So we can take a quick look at. Okay, so you start off in the museum, and the first thing you do is you walk. This is an actual rendition of the Walters Art Museum. So the first challenge you've got, if we can get the sound back on, is to solve a bunch of puzzles in here. The game is driven by the idea that there's a crazed archaeologist that's found a way to go back in time, and he's causing all kinds of earthquakes and other bad things, whose name, by the way, is Dexter. So, yes, why not? So, and so you're in order to get him, you have to first figure out how to go back into time, and you do this by solving a puzzle here, which you need to line up the right signet, signet here with the right timeline. Can you turn the sound on? Okay, well, what he's doing here is he has solved the first puzzle in the museum, and he is now able to go back in time and enter the, well, I'll just talk over it, don't worry. I don't know what, why we're having sound troubles here. But anyway, he's now going back into so he's going back to Uruk, 3100 BC. This is a land, this is the time at which writing was really invented. And in order to win this game, which is to find Dexter, you have to solve a whole series of puzzles. And the first thing that the guy needs to do is you're taking the persona of a kid who is actually, we know his name because of the so this kid has got to go to school, and he shows up talking to his instructor. So the first thing he's got to do is find the schoolmaster. Okay. Well, I'm going to, in the interest of time, I'm just going to stop here. And but the thrust of this is that in order to save, in order to solve the first riddle here, or sort of get through the first level, you need to find out how to write things down. And if we can go to the very end, yeah, here we go. And you'll end up trying to decipher this tablet, which is actually in the Walters Art Museum. So at the end of this, you'll actually know what all these scribbles mean, at least pictorially, what they're trying to represent. And that'll allow you to get into the second level, which takes you to in the year 2000, and finally a third level, which is Kalhu in the year 900. So in the process, you can't move through this without learning how to at least decode the language and without understanding a lot about how the culture operates. Now the third one I wanted to talk to you about very briefly is the MCI responder. This is aimed at fire chiefs. The challenge that we're facing here is one that's faced in a lot of training operations where very, very important things need to be trained, but for people who never routinely experience them. And this is, in this case, it's a high-rise fire. So but there are lots of places where a team of people need to get together and operate correctly on something which they have very seldom experienced. And the existing training approaches is very expensive. In fact, working with the New York Fire Department, typically to train 4 chiefs, it takes more than 4 instructors. They spend all day. They only get one exercise. The exercise is a field exercise, and they make sure that you can't screw anything up, basically, because you've only got one shot at this. So with these tools, in principle, you can build systems in which these guys can go through lots of different scenarios, demonstrate skills, and practice not just once every 3 or 4 years, but actually do it routinely on lots of different incidents. Again, this was funded through the Department of Commerce and Education, and involved the Fire Department of New York and the University of Wisconsin. So if we can take a quick look at this, I'll give you a sense of. Now, in this case, we will be. This is a very different situation than the ones we had before. In fact, if you're controlling a fire as a fire chief, the first guy that gets on the scene the first chief there is in control. The guy typically sits in the lobby of the building if it's a high-rise fire, and his entire communication with the outside world is through radio. And so in this one, the communication is entirely through communication through these little personal assistant, the so-called handy-talkie devices. So you're just talking to people, giving them commands, getting information about the situation. Well, let's turn off the sound here. So you can either talk and get voice recognitions to giving very precise instructions to people on different floors. You get information about what they see back from them. There's actually a live simulation running in back of it, so that if you send people to the wrong floor, they don't see anything. But if the fire keeps burning and they send them back, there will be a fire. One of the things that you need to maintain here is situational awareness. You need to keep track of where all of your guys are all of the time. So occasionally this stops and asks you some questions about have you turned off the air conditioner? Is there a crew on floor 2? And then you're given a debrief. But one of the other things we're trying out here is not just this very interesting instructional approach, but also the idea of trying to build a tool which the firemen themselves can use to develop their own instructional systems, and then have a website where people can collaborate and share the things that they've built. So it's got a tool where you can build any high-rise. It's very, very simple, so that you just need the floor plan and some photographs in order to put this together. We've gotten a bunch of these, particularly some of the younger firemen are just delighted to try to help set up some of these scenarios. But this whole idea of being able to set up a system where people are collaboratively building and testing and sharing their own instructional environments is I think going to be a crucial innovation in this whole field. So if we can go to my last slide. One of the things, it's of course frustrating to try to talk you through 3 highly interactive systems here with very little time. But one of the things that clearly comes out of this is you start building these systems, you end up with a raft of questions. Does this work for whom? Under what circumstances? What would happen if you did X? Well, the fact is that most of these questions we don't have good answers to, and they're important and deep questions. And that's, of course, exactly why we're arguing that you need increased federal research in this field. One of the problems, of course, is in order to test these complicated tools, you need to build them first. And there's the danger of putting all of your investment in evaluating things that are 5 years old rather than trying to build some of these really new platform systems and finding out whether they work. There's no question that there's a huge amount of talent in the commercial gaming industry and in other information industries that's directly relevant to this set of problems. But the market is making it very difficult for them to invest in this. There's been a lot of talk recently that productivity in the service sector has to be an essential part of any innovation strategy, because it is a giant chunk of our exports, it's a big part of our economy, and surely there's no more important part of the service sector than the education and training enterprises in the country, which taken together are $1 trillion a year. And there does seem to be a genuine opportunity to improve the outcome, not just for an elite few, but for everybody using these kinds of technologies. So in my view, the kinds of research investment that DoIT would invest in is an extremely high leverage use of federal money in education. So with that, Michael will get the hook, and I will be happy to answer questions later. As I said, the hard questions go to Kay, and I hope have some games running that people can actually play, so instead of just watching a video, you can interact.
Thank you, Henry. Those are, very impressive. I wish those were around now, and hopefully they will by the time Jim's kids are, in high school, because, I know my son he's just finishing 8th grade, and in Montgomery County Middle School for science, they're relying still on Mimeo sheets and crossword puzzles. It's certainly nothing like Immunitac. So our next speaker is bringing a DoD perspective and has for us some new data from the Defense Department about the effectiveness of these advanced technologies for training and learning. Dexter Fletcher is senior researcher at the Institute for Defense Analyses. He's a psychologist by training. Dr. Fletcher is a leading authority on military education and training issues, particularly as it relates to the use of advanced technologies and human-machine interface.
Thank you.
Dexter.
Well, you found Dexter anyway. So here I am. So in 5 minutes or so, I'm supposed to tell you about advanced technologies for learning in the Department of Defense. This will be a rapid tour, I must say. But it's not a problem. It's a challenge, an opportunity, as they say, to excel. So let's see what happens. I will be talking about advanced technology for learning in the Department of Defense. And do you advance this by which of these little buttons? Aha! There it is.
First, we got to get up on the screen.
Oh, that's right.
For some reason.
I can see it here perfectly well.
A few minutes ahead of schedule.
That's right.
So you don't even
Okay.
have to strain too badly.
Well, I'll try not to talk too fast. I'll try not to talk too fast. Outstanding. As you look at education and training, most people think of training and education in the Department of Defense as something like the commander wanting to get his troops out in the field and march through the mud and so forth. There's a lot more to it than that. There is, for instance, residential training of individuals to train them to fix tank turrets and operate air conditioning. It turns out that about 86% of what is taught in the Department of Defense by way of individual training is directly relevant to civilian activities. So it's not just bang, bang, shoot 'em up kind of stuff. And I guess the other thing I want to say is, so you can have this 2x2 kind of matrix. It says there are individuals training and there are collectives that are training. By collectives, I mean crews, groups, units, teams, and so forth. We've become very interested in that, and there's a lot to be said about that, and I'm not going to say much about it because there's not much time. I will concentrate on individual training, but as threatened, let's talk a little bit about the collective training that's going on. Mostly the collective training that is carried out by the Department of Defense is carried out via simulations. Simulations sort of like games. For instance, using the network simulation kind of capability, you can have somebody sitting in a tank simulator in Germany being attacked by somebody in Alabama with a helicopter simulator and calling for support from somebody who's in an aircraft simulator in Nevada. So all this can happen, and as a matter of fact, hundreds of these types of engagements can be happening at one time. It turns out to be a good deal because we can save about a third of the cost for training. Certainly it's an improvement over going to the field. Speaking of the field, which we describe as live simulation, it's all simulation until you get out and you're being shot at. So live simulation, many people think of that as the final test for the success of any simulation in game. Not quite so. There are many things that you can do in a virtual simulation where you're sitting in a simulation, or simulator, or in a constructive simulation where you're just, your computers are battling one another, that you can't do in the field. Indirect fire. You get people out there saying, they throw a firecracker at you and say, boom, you've just been hit by indirect fire by an artillery shell. It's pretty hokey. And the troops know hokey, believe me. So all this contributes to operational effectiveness, and it's an interesting issue how to trade off these various capabilities. Live in the field, constructive computers battling computers, virtual simulators battling each other. And it's an interesting piece of research, and it needs to be done. Now, this is a slide that you've seen on Henry's stuff, and it has to do with the difference in learning between people who are trained in groups, say a classroom, which turns out to be 26.5 students. You see, you learn something every day, or I did anyways, or individually tutored, one-on-one, one teacher, one student. You'd expect the one teacher, one student situation to be really good. It is, but it's amazing how good it is. It is 2 standard deviations better, according to the research that we have, and there's a number of studies of this sort. 2 standard deviations mean that it's an improvement from the 50th percentile up to the 98th percentile. So it's a big difference. It's not just a little difference. And that's why this thing is called a tutorial imperative. The problem is that in addition to being a tutorial imperative, it's an economic impossibility. We cannot afford one teacher for every one student. Sometimes we do for piloting, surgery, things like that, but not in general. Now, it turns out that we've got these wonderful new kind of capabilities called computers, and they all have if statements in it, which is to say they can adapt to what's going on at any one moment. So we have instructional technologies that are interactive. And if we take advantage of them, we find that you can individualize, adjust for the student, sequence, content, style, difficulty, pace, and intensify the interactivity. In a classroom, a student may be asked about 3 questions in an hour. And there are people sitting back of classrooms taking these measures. In a tutoring situation or in one using technology, it's up in the neighborhood of 150 to 200 in an hour. Now it may strike you as a lot, but some of these are pretty easy questions. Did you understand? Yeah, I guess so. Do you have to go to the bathroom? Things like that. So that all these things go on. But there's a lot of interactivity. You can be really stupid about your instructional design and still be quite successful. So the point is that instructional technologies, and the reason why we turn to them, is because they make the educational imperative, individual tutoring, affordable. So overall, you might ask, is that successful? And we find that technology-based instruction reduced costs by about 1/3. And you have your choice. You can either increase effectiveness by about 1/3, holding the time constant, or you can hold effectiveness constant, which is something we like to do in training because you want everybody over some threshold. So if you hold effectiveness constant, you can reduce time to learn by about 1/3. And of course, what's the real payoff here? For us, the real payoff is in operational effectiveness, and it turns out to be equal for in industry. It improves productivity. Now, if you look at savings in the Department of Defense, if you were able to save 30% of the time to train some of the people in a $4 billion activity known as specialized training, if you saved it for 20% of your students, you save $263 million a year. If you do it for 60% of the students, you save $789 million a year. Yeah, $1 million here, $1 million there, as somebody named Everett Dixon used to say, eventually that really adds up to real money. So it amounts to a lot. We're dealing with something that has just a slug of promise here. And I want to say a word about performance aiding, just because it is something that, using the same knowledge structures that you have for education and training, you can provide answers to somebody who's simply trying to solve a problem, who's not necessarily trying to change behavior on any semi-permanent basis, but is simply trying to solve a problem. And the Chinese army is coming down the hill, and he's got to say, what do I do next? And so that's performance aiding, decision aiding, all of that is bundled up together. And these are some data from that, and I wish I had some time to discuss it, but the avionics specialists are people who have had a specialized training in avionics repair for the F-16. The APG technicians are folks who know how to drive the airplane around on the apron, and oh yeah, they can check the oil and stuff like that. It turns out that given an interactive device, IMAX, the Interactive Multimedia Information System, they turn out to be just as good in solving problems as those people who were trained as avionics specialists. Guess which one costs more to train? It costs a lot more to produce an aviation specialist than it does an APG technician. And besides, if you learn something in a class, what are you going to remember? 10%, something like that? When you really need it, you want to have some refresher kind of capability, and you can get that if you have some sort of performance aid that you're carrying around with it. Hence, Department of Defense training transformation. This is the big thing that is going on. The transformation is in the air. It's one of those words that's going around. NATO has transformation activities. Department of Defense. Everybody's transforming one or the other. So it's a world of transformers. But this has three capabilities, and one is to. I thought I'd just mention it. This is something the Department of Defense is quite sincere about, but it's a very big activity. But a key portion of it is advanced distributed learning, which is the initiative that I've been heading, and my team has been working on for these many years. As a matter of fact, this is a notion that we've been working on for about 30 years. To tell you how old I am, but we've known a lot. We've known a lot of stuff about the value of using technology in instruction. But the idea here is to provide education, training, and performance aiding tailored to the individual, but available. And here's the key: available anytime, anywhere. It's anytime, anywhere. So it begins to get at a serious capability that we need, but it also suggests something that's a little insidious, because imagine anytime, anywhere education being provided in our current instructional institutions, which are based on classrooms. Budgeting is based on classrooms, promotion, assignment, staffing is based on classrooms, all of that. So all of a sudden we're saying we can do this anytime, anywhere. Now, this is something that's going on in the Department of Defense. It's quite seriously needed in the Department of Defense, but, it has serious implications for schools as well. It needs study. It needs attention. So anyways, the long-term vision is that there will be in the worldwide ether all these objects. They will be objects that are shareable, and I'll say just a very little bit about that in a second, but they're shareable and can be assembled in real time, on demand, by a server. And the server then feeds it out to individuals who are carrying something very much like personal learning associates. And we have them now. We have telephones that can access Google. What the heck? Google is probably the major web-based training capability or education capability in the world right now. So and it's only going to expand. So the notion is they're assembled in real time, on demand for learners. And the learners will be engaged not so much in lessons as they will be in a conversation. I need to know something about this. Tell me what I should do. And the computer can respond. The computer that's in his hand. And these are getting to be serious computers. They're quite powerful. And of course they can be used by groups, individuals, people sitting at 2 a.m. in the kitchen or in classrooms or wherever. The notion behind distributed rather than distance learning is that distributed learning can be used anytime, anywhere, including classrooms. Okay, now we've come up with some standards so that actually those objects that you saw over there in the cloud on the left are accessible. They are portable. They can go across. They can run across any platform. They're interoperable in that sense. They're reusable. They're durable, so that they don't stop working if you change the underlying operating system. All of that good stuff, and that's covered by some standards like SCORM, the Shareable Content Objects Reference Model that we've developed and is being used internationally right now. I've got 2 people over in Paris talking to NATO guys about it. And then CORDA, which is the Content Object Repository Discovery Resolution and Registry Architecture, something like that. Anyways, the notion behind SCORM is that you can get those objects out of the ether and use them. The notion behind CORDA is that you can find them. And the nice thing about CORDA is that you can find them, but it still retains local control for the people who created the registries in which they're used. So you get both local control over access, but global identification. So those are the things that we're working on right now, and that's an awful romp over a bunch of stuff. But I think eventually where are we headed? This, in the lovely words, in conclusion, where are we headed? Okay, fewer lessons. Remember the business about a conversation. We will have conversations with learners, with people trying to solve problems. And yeah, they may have some lessons included in them. They may have simulations that they present, but it will be taking place as an interactive conversation. So more learning, very probably. Anyways, that's what the data have to say. Fewer tests. Henry talked about continuous assessment. It's continuous, unobtrusive assessment. If you have a personal learning assistant that is yours, that you carry around, it learns an awful lot about you. And it better if it's going to tailor information to you. And of course, it's important for adult learning because adults bring all sorts of prior knowledge to any learning situation. And you really don't want to waste their time teaching them stuff they already know, and you want to concentrate on stuff they don't know. Personal learning associates, I said that. Less authoring, more material. I won't hit on that. But I guess the bottom line is that we're aiming at instruction and performance decision aiding bundled together as conversation. And that is, the digital opportunities. So in sum, after saying in conclusion, okay, this stuff reduced costs. We have hard data about that, lots of data. Not in every case, but in most cases. Secondly, it increases learning or reduces time to learn. Again, a lot of hard data. You can really foul it up and do it in a stupid manner, but nonetheless, if it's done right, it achieves those ends. And it can combine training, education, and performance aiding in one package, which is really important out in the workaday workplace world that is concerned with productivity and effectiveness. And of course, anytime, anywhere. So what do we have? We have a bunch of pieces here. We're working on trying to assemble them, but there's a lot of research needed still, and we could, we, the Department of Defense, are spending some on it. But much more needs to be done, particularly if we're going to build that server that's going to assemble objects in real time, on demand, in response to learner needs. Thank you.
Thank you, Dexter. So we've heard from the defense sector, and now we'll hear from our final 2 speakers from industry. And first up is Walter Cheek, who is Vice President of Breakaway Games. Walter has led the development and growth of of both domestic and international specialty product companies, and is most recently, and very relevant here, led corporate business development at MNet Corporation, an Ohio-based provider of distance learning networks and educational portal technologies. So, take it away.
Thank you. I have a question. How many people here play games? Interesting. Henry said earlier, well, let me start this way, I'm with a company called Breakaway Games. We do both commercial games as well as serious games, and the serious games are targeted at Department of Defense, general industry, medicine, Homeland Security, the intelligence community. Those are all people that have interest in the underlying technology. Henry put a slide up that said the current market for games is, I believe, $7 billion was the number he put up. I think it's more closely $23+ billion globally, and it is a global business. It's growing, and that $23 billion does not take into account any of the serious game business to speak of. And so, as the DoD, as you spoke, begins to adopt, as the intelligence community begins to adopt Homeland Security, general education, general industry, that number will grow probably much larger than the entertainment number. So fundamentally, we have a huge market, and what we have is two sectors taking care of it. Microsoft, who will speak in a couple of minutes, is one of the leaders of the entertainment sector. The sector from DoD, from education, those types of things will typically be dealt with by what is today 300 to 400 game companies that are developing technologies in support of these other non-entertainment sectors. So we have some very serious issues. One of those is that we have more than 20 universities in this country that are doing both undergraduate and graduate level courses in the area of game technology or interactive technologies. Those courses that are being delivered are being done probably without any interactivity between designers of learning systems as well as the people that could potentially hire them, which would be us, the game companies, and clearly has no vision in terms of what is the end user need. And so if they're going to go into DoD, if they're going to go into general industry, if they're going to go into education, there is whatever the need is today, but what is the need going forward? I have a 9-year-old son, and when he was about 1.5 years old, I'd wake him up in the morning, throw him in my bed, shove a bottle in his mouth, and turn on Bloomberg in the morning. And I did that because there was lots of moving bits and pieces and things, and it kept him entertained. And I said to him, when I come back, we'll start to talk about currency translation. I asked the same question every morning and never got an answer. But I watched him play a game called Sonic the Hedgehog. And Sonic the Hedgehog is a really cool game for those people that haven't played it. But for most people over 35 years old, it begins to give them a headache at the rate at which you have to make decisions. For people somewhere between his age of 6 years old and under 30, they're very comfortable with it. So they actually learn very differently. They make decisions at a much higher speed, and they have an appetite for data at a rate which a lot of other people do not have. So here's all of a sudden a capability that we can use, and a capability that we are going to actually have to address, because the people that are growing up are really not going to sit there and learn exactly the way they have in the past. So there's some initiatives that have been undertaken. One is at Texas A&M. The project is called Pulse. Breakaway is actually involved in it. Kay, you were on the board, I believe, of that. And Henry, and that's the medical community to look at new nurse training and physician training. There are people within general industry who are looking at setting up the same types of universities in their own communities, and that's to look at trading commodities, how they'll look at the inner operations within their own companies. There are groups that are within DC that are asking questions of, can I take an environment where I could look at alternative energies and look at the social, economic, political, and environmental ramifications in the short term and 25 years out. And they want to do it in the type of world that you described, Dexter. And that is, can I go in, can I play what if, can I think about it differently? And what that says to a company such as ours is that the idea of building games and the people that we employ today, the ideal people, would have 15 to 20 years experience in game design. Art, programming, design, project management, those types of things. Well, those people have all been taken, and they either work for Microsoft, they work for Sony, they work for Breakaway, those people have already been taken. So they're not available now. So our way of teaching within our community is actually mentoring. And so we bring someone in, they start as a game tester, and they move forward, so on and so forth. That's not going to be enough. And so what's happening is we're starting to see that people are building their own games. And so kids in college can go into certain games, and they can actually build mods of those games. And they can do it with the tools that are provided by the game company. Very shortly, we're going to see that happening within high school level. And kids are going to go in, and they're going to start building games. To make this technology successful, to make it successful within the education field, it's actually going to take that you have the Microsoft version of game technology that you have at your desktop that you can sit and build your own game. Or you can go in and complement another game. And it's very doable. It's incredibly doable. Before that happens is, and we were asked to speak today, is right now there's a small community of a couple of hundred independent game developers, which are a little bit different than publishers. Microsoft is a publisher, that we are funding work to demonstrate the efficacy of our own technologies. So we did some work with DOJ, we've done work with Institute for Defense Analysis, we've done some in the medical community to be able to show the efficacy of children who are undergoing cancer therapies and how this could be used for pain mitigation. But they're all being done with our money, and we're small businesses. That's an issue. Secondarily is for this technology to move forward, we now need to coalesce the communities and the people that actually do instructional design, the end users, the education systems. And until that happens, what we may have is a technology, but not a technology that is actually assimilated by the various communities. Okay? So that's about all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Walter. Yeah, I just want to make sure, because I think we mentioned this in the very beginning, but a lot of people also have come in, is that after our last speaker and a chance for a few questions, you're all welcome to stay and play these games, and play the Immune Attack, Discover Babylon, Incident Responder that you saw demoed here. So please plan to stick around. Our final speaker is Marlon Buckner, who is Senior Federal Affairs Manager for Microsoft here in D.C., where he oversees management and implementation of Microsoft public policy concerning education, workforce development, the Xbox, and gaming. And Marlon is very much a Hill veteran, having served as LA for Senator Charles Schumer and Chief of Staff to Congressman Harold Ford. And of course, I think most folks know that the Xbox, they haven't been able to keep it on the shelf. It's been such a hot item, and is showing up in an increasing number of homes. So we'll hear from the platform company. Marlon?
Okay.
Good morning. Yes, still morning. Good. Yeah, I'm Marlon Buckner from Microsoft, and it would appear that I am the last thing standing between you and lunch, so I will be brief. First of all, let me thank the New America Foundation for hosting this event, and to my colleagues and fellow panelists. And it's really great to go last, because I can basically sort of look up and down and say, yes, I agree. We've heard a lot this morning about the tools and technologies and techniques that are really creating some extraordinary value in the educational marketplace and are really driving change in the way that we think about excuse me, the delivery of learning systems. But I think to try to bring a lot of this together, what I'd really like to do is sort of bubble it up and provide for you in the next few minutes a Microsoft perspective on how we think about these issues at the macro level, because to kind of riff off Walter's last point, it's really the systemic issues, I think, that we need to begin to think about more clearly, more substantively, and more expansively if we're going to aggregate all of this extraordinary work and really make it mean something, both in the public sector and in the private sector. So to that end, what I'd like to focus on is to kind of put some of this into, frankly, into a systemic workforce development context. I can talk for days about the Xbox and all that sort of thing, but I do think that it's valuable for us here to consider these systemic issues into which these issues fit. And so to that end, what I would like to do is focus on 3 key points. First, what we at Microsoft like to call the new normal. And this revolves around a lot of what we've heard from the Department of Defense, distributed learning, and demographic factors. The second thing I'd like to discuss really revolves around some of the challenges that these two elements really pose to workforce development and education systems. And then the third, I'd like to suggest some principles and some ideas, and maybe make some proposals about how to move forward. So let me begin, as a dear professor friend of mine once said, by explicating the painfully obvious. The new normal. Okay, demography and distributed learning, right? We heard a little bit about Walter's soon-to-be private equity king, son. It struck a chord for me. When I was on the Hill, I left about 5 years ago, and I was about 10 years or so, as a chief of staff, I was about 10 years ahead of the kids that I had hired. So I would be in the front office, sort of managing things, and from time to time I would go into the back where the LAs sat, and it was frenetic back there. I mean, multiple screens, multiple devices, and it really, and half the time I'm like, are y'all doing any work? But it was incredible. It was absolutely extraordinary. And it was at that point that I was really truly struck by not just the sort of the cognitive issues there, but the pedagogical questions that were raised by how they were interacting with technology, whether that's game technology or other kinds of technologies. It was absolutely extraordinary. And for those of you who, I'm sure most of you have read John Beck and Mitchell Wade's book, Got Game, that actually kind of talks about some of the business consequences of this millennial generation. Extraordinary. So you've got the demographic on the one hand, and then you've got the distributed learning environment, and that sort of really goes to the idea that the workplace, when you think about the workplace, is no longer a place at all, but it's places. Multiple environments, and what we really need to think about, obviously this workplace has been emerging for a long time, but technologies have really kind of come together to make this environment really ubiquitous. So this new normal really has, I think, created some significant challenges to the current workforce development system, and this is kind of how we at Microsoft are really going to bubble this up when we think about it as a business, when we think about it as a corporate entity with a public responsibility to engage in a policy dialogue, as I said earlier, to kind of bring all of this together and to think substantively about how to drive change. So let's talk a little bit about some of the challenges that have been that the new normal, as it were, have created. The first really revolves around digital literacy, and I think here, the questions about the need for the highest quality digital content at every level and in every phase of the learning process, regardless of regardless of the population, regardless of the constituency, if you will, that we're talking about. We really need to think substantively about how to ensure that when we talk about ICT capability, we're talking about more than just the acquisition of a set of technical competencies, but we're really talking about cognitive proficiency that allows for the use and the development of these technologies and the ways in which we communicate information appropriately using them. I think there are a couple of key hurdles that exist there. There's certainly barriers there's certainly certification concerns and assessment concerns, and I'll talk about those in a little bit. Well, let's drill down on this issue of assessment and credentialing, because I think that's an important one. Certainly from a business standpoint, I mean, the workforce development environment into which a lot of this fits is not really isn't structured, isn't situated to handle the new way that learning happens. And I think that's certainly, from a policy perspective, an issue that we need to deal with and an issue that we need to think through. The issue of assessment, whether an individual has actually learned what they say they have learned, and how do we deal with those kinds of questions? I mean, there are tools that have been developed. There are automated assessment tools, intelligent tutors, and so forth. But again, we're not at the point yet from a systemic standpoint to think about how to really make those things work. So the central question then that we've been asking ourselves over the course of the last couple of years is, okay, how do we drive real change? Obviously we're going to invest over $6 billion this year in research and development at Microsoft, and we're doing the work on the ground. But I think as a community, I think it's incumbent upon us. We believe it's certainly incumbent upon Microsoft as a company, but we think that working together with as many partners in this sort of innovation ecosystem as we can, to think about some basic policy principles that we can bring to bear on the public debate, so that we can move the ball down the field, so that we can move from, frankly, what is an industrial model into the 21st century. I'm reminded of Bill Gates' comments at the National Governors Association, where he was talking about essentially the anachronism that is the American high school. Really, that's in a lot of ways the kind of thing that we're talking about here. So let me just suggest sort of three fundamental principles that we can use or debate that might help us really aggregate all of this extraordinary work that we've been talking about this morning. The first is a standards-based system for ICT skills development and assessment, and we heard from my colleague at DoD that there's certainly a lot of that going on there. Now, how do we get that? How do we get that out of DoD? How do we get that thinking out of DoD? And how do we really socialize that up here on the Hill, so that policymakers and influentials are really beginning to think about these things in systemic ways? The second key principle revolves around the connection of labor markets and workforce development systems, and this really goes to to driving forward in the distributed learning context, so that we are talking about learning happening without regard to geography or institutional limitations. The third principle that I'd like to suggest revolves around universal access to workforce development resources, all of which we've talked about here. These are all workforce development resources. These are all resources that are designed to help individuals learn to move forward in the economy, to drive innovation at sort of the highest level, if you will, of research, but also to ensure that as Henry indicated earlier, that this is not just for the elite, but that this is broadly based and for everyone. So to ensure that individuals and employers are able to take advantage of sort of the interoperability, if you will, of work and learning in an ICT-enabled workplace, I think these are going to be some key questions when it comes time to really assess the impact of this work on innovation, on productivity, on job creation, and on economic success. In conclusion, I hope that I've been able to briefly outline for you, kind of again at the highest sort of policy level, the challenges that Microsoft sees to bringing systemic change, or to making systemic change happen, so that we can really absorb and leverage and really fully take advantage of all of these extraordinary resources that we've seen this morning, and ultimately really drive the next wave of innovation, economic growth, and prosperity. So thanks very much for your diligence and your attention, and I think we're close to lunch. Thanks.
Thank you, Marlon. Before we take a few questions and let you have at the games, I wanted to ask Ann Murphy, the project director for Digital Promise, just give us a brief legislative update.
It's clear what the problems are, isn't it? I think that listening to all the speakers, we come to the conclusions that there's a great deal of fragmentation in what's out there. There's a great deal that needs to be learned. There's a great deal of coordination that needs to be done. And in fact, beginning with this project, the first challenge to us was to look at ways that education and training could be more effective and more efficient and more economical. And we came to the conclusion that technology could make this happen, as Henry addressed. We ran into these fragmentation problems, and the design of the Digital Opportunity Trust, which is our effort on the Hill, is to help be a coordinating body for a lot of these efforts. So would it involve government and industry and educators? What we do know is how we teach is as important as what we teach, that we have a whole different set of kinds of learners, both in our classrooms and in our workforce, and that we have a basis of getting these materials into some technological freedom that they can be used efficiently. After 5 years of development, we have legislation on both the House and Senate sides that is moving its way through in conjunction with the innovation legislation that Larry referred to originally. Here are some of the leaders that we've had helping us with this effort: Sheila Duffy from Senator Dodd's office. And on the Senate side, Senator Domenici has taken quite an interest in putting it in the innovation bill that's coming through the Senate. I think most of you who follow these things know that Commerce has passed a bill and Energy has passed a bill. They'll come together and come with a leadership bill. On the House side, Rick Lombardo is here, and I saw Lori Rowley from Congressman Regulus' office, Colin Kroll from Mr. Markey's office, who were the original sponsors of this. But the bill has been referred to Commerce, so we're really happy that Jalen Jensen's from Mr. Barton's office was able to be with us. We have met with Mr. Barton. He's really an enthusiastic supporter of the project, and has encouraged us to be part of the team developing the legislation that they'll have on the Commerce Department. So we've been working with Jalen and Andy Black, and hope we'll be moving things forward on the House side. So those of you who are on the Hill working with your congressman, I think we've all learned a lot today. We need to digest it, bring it back. If you have any questions, Rainey Guilford, who works with me, is here. I think most of you have met her. We can all be reached through digitalpromise.org on the website, and our phone numbers are available there too, so you can get a hold of us directly. But we begin to see that this innovation legislation probably will come through by the end of this Congress. At least that's the plan up here, and we need the help of everybody in this room to help make it evolve in ways that will be beneficial to all of us. So thank you for coming. Thank you for your attention. And feel free to play the games. We must vacate this room no longer than 12:30, no later than 12:30. We have had great cooperation from the Sergeant at Arms, but it will not continue if we're not out of here. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Ann, and that Do It has just gotten tremendous momentum, in part thanks to your hard work on it. So if we could take a couple questions before we turn to the games, and please introduce where you're from. Yes.
new technologies we might have developed to handle multi-person, issue games, that kind of
Okay.
Good question.
Yeah, it's interesting. Actually, it was, makes me think, for one thing, that these multiplayer interactive games, including yours, saying even with non-human agents, are going to be, something for the future. But does anyone have a... Yeah, sure.
Some of that's already being done. There's a game that was built out of Carnegie Mellon, and I think it's called Peacekeeper, that they're doing some work. Breakaway built a game called A Force More Powerful, which is the trainer game for activists working in non-democratic environments. And fundamentally, it goes through the planning and analysis of actually leading in a movement. And so the impact of it would be sort of change pre-conflict, or how you would deal with, start to look at things from a stability operations point of view. It's back to coalition building and change those things. So it is going on. It is being funded privately for the most part. And there has been a lot of interest, I think, globally in saying, now can you build it so it could actually be looked at from an experimentation point of view in terms of running the types of scenarios. So there are people interested in it, and they're also looking at other problems that would fit in that same area. It has started.
Oh, yes.
That's a very interesting issue, and of course a very large. As a matter of fact, I think it's probably one of the most interesting issues I know of, particularly when it comes to providing a mechanized op-for, or let's say a computer-generated opposition force. Because in most operations, what you have is somebody takes an action and somebody takes a reaction, and then they sort of ratchet up. So you have to have the capability of learning. It's not just realistic behavior worked into these things. They also have to be able to learn from the action that goes on. We reviewed and updated Pew and Mavor, if you know that study of simulation and cognitive models, and still didn't find very much that was going to answer the issue of learning. So that's learning by computer-generated entities is a really important issue. Another issue that is being addressed very well is being treated by Barry Sullivan at the University of Pennsylvania, who has made a very large review of behavior moderators, so that you can see how culture and the issues of the moment and motivations of the moment might affect the behavior of computer-generated entities. Now, concentrated on computer-aided entities, but of course what we're going to do is we're going to be working in concert with them in many ways. So they're not just going to be the opposition force, they're going to be part of the friendly force too, and it is a way of building in cultural capabilities that we're going to have to deal with both on the friendly side and the opposition side. These are issues that are being worked on. I would like to say that we've made wonderful progress and they're all going to be solved tomorrow. No, but there's sniffing around. It's an important issue, and there's some fascinating work going on in this area. The problems remain to be solved, of course.
Yes?
How is the educational community reacting to this? I don't see anybody from the basic high school division of the Department of Education working with you on this.
Okay, Marlon, do you want to
Sure,
add
yeah.
that footnote, and then we'll...
Yeah, the first principle was a standards-based approach to skills development and assessment. Simple as that.
Yeah, how's the
Well,
education community?
One of the troubles is that you don't have time to talk about the entire partnership that people have been putting together, but at least each one of our games, of course, we try to design with the people who actually teach this stuff in the classroom as a integral part of the team. And then when we're going out evaluating them, we're getting it evaluated not only by the students but by the teachers. The evaluations are still underway, but in most cases, the teachers are, if anything, more enthusiastic than the students, because once the kid has played the game, you're in the classroom and you say, well, did you remember when the guy was running across the Uruk and saw the donkey over there? Well, yeah, they'll remember that. And so you can have a discussion about when did they domesticate the horse or whatever, so that the teachers are in fact, at least as far as we can see, part of the solution, not part of the problem. You, of course, need to involve them early on. And the teachers' organizations have been strong supporters of this research initiative we've been undertaking from the beginning. So it's not to say that you're not going to find a few curmudgeons out there, but in general, they have been very, very enthusiastic.
I would,
I'd like to get one from this, too. Kind of the coalition that we built includes teachers, and I would say when we first started 7 or 8 years ago, there was a lot of pushback, but that has really quite melted to the point that the National Education Association is one of our major coalition players, and the president of that organization was very involved with the forum we did at Commerce, and I helped develop the next phases of this. So I think you find that they are very aware that the kids in their classrooms are very different than the kids who were in the classrooms when I was in school.
And the administration's Department of Education has had a number of reports calling for moving in this direction. In general, I saw just on the back of the Do It bill summary a quote from former Secretary of Education Rod Page, which is very appropriate here. We still educate our students based on an agricultural timetable in an industrial setting, yet tell students they live in a digital age. And the department has had a number of reports calling for, increased educational productivity with technology. But of course, always a question of, putting the money behind that, which is what Congress needs to do now. Is there a final question? Yes?
Roland Deutsch, I had the pleasure of working with Kelly there and Fletcher. I've worked at the Department of Labor for many years, now retired, but this question I think is really deserves a little bit more thought, is how to organize the institutional groups. At the Department of Labor, for 20 years, this technology issue was just sitting there, and most of the visionary people, very few, saw tremendously an opportunity. Institutionally, the resistance was intense, I think. I mean, it went out beyond the Labor Department to OMB, to OPM, and the amount of work that we tried to get going and how much energy it took really was fairly amazing. Meanwhile, the technology community was kind of roaring ahead. Dexter doing collab activities. I think things need to happen at that end. I'd appreciate any thoughts as to how the institutional setting might be improved, or at least their receptivity toward it.
Yeah, it's a very appropriate bookend for this, Larry.
very quickly, I measure this at home. My wife is a teacher at City College in New York, and she first thought this was a plot to put teachers out of business when we started this 6 or 7 years ago. Now she has become a fervent advocate, recognizing what has happened. And I think one thing that we cannot emphasize enough is how quickly the technology is changing. We are still on the frontier of this. And as you can see from all the discussion, people are waking up to the possibilities. This was not true even a few years ago. I wrote a book that was published in the mid-90s. I not even heard of the internet, and I had to change the book in the last few years in order to bring it up to date. And here we are in a computer, internet, digital age. So obviously, particularly in education, which by rights is a very conservative institution, it's taking a while. But as Ann pointed out, we have now the endorsement of virtually every major national education, and not only the endorsement, but the active support of virtually every national educational institution. And I think that landscape is changing. But what we have to recognize is the speed with which the technology is developing. that will spread wide and therefore needs the kind of coordination and standards development and set of priorities that will serve the public interest. And I will just conclude by saying what started the Digital Promise Project, which was founded by the Carnegie and Century and Knight and MacArthur Foundations, was the concern back in 1999 as the century was changing that these new information technologies, which were beginning to transform the rest of society, were leaving our public interest institutions back in the dust. And how could we develop some policies that would rectify that? And look how far we have come.
If I could just jump in quickly on that.
Sure.
One of the central questions that we at Microsoft have asked ourselves, and to that end, we've undertaken in conjunction with the Department of Labor, a partnership that's designed to assist a multi-million dollar, multi-year partnership that's designed to assist the one-stop centers that exist across the country and to bring resources to bear, training, software, and in particular, I guess, the training resources to these one-stops to allow to basically to test how can we improve the service delivery model that exists in the current system. Now, I grant you that doesn't. I'm not sure that goes entirely to your question, but I do think that as a first step, it's important for us. It's important for the private sector to recognize that these are the kinds of collaborations and the kinds of initiatives that need to be undertaken so that we can at least identify some best practices to accelerate some of these, some of the models in these different environments. So, I mean, that's just one example of something that we've tried to do. We're going to continue to do that through the deployment of a digital literacy curriculum, both at these one-stop centers and more widely. But I do think that, as I said, we want to work with as many partners as we can to try to drive that sort of systemic change. So I hope that goes to at least a part of your question.
Well, if anyone in the audience would like to play with these games a bit, Henry, should they just, where do they go to these? Each side of the room, I think over here, over there. And thank you very much for attending this forum, and thanks to our panel.
Sure.
Yeah.